At this time, we'll call to order the regular City Council meeting for October 10th, 2022. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
City Clerk Deaton, could you let the roll call show that Councilmember Hanson is absent? Councilmember Kennedy, go ahead.
I'll make a motion to excuse Councilmember Hanson.
A second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. And we'll move on to the minutes, or excuse me, approval of the minutes, September 26, 2022. Councilmember Kibble,
I'll move the minutes.
I'll support.
any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Approval of this evening's bills. Councilmember Mosier,
I'll move the bills.
I'll second.
any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Approval of the agenda this evening.
I'll move the agenda. Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Tonight's consent agenda, concrete donation for first responder memorial. Councilmember Kurtzwell,
Thank you. I move the consent agenda as presented by the mayor.
I'll support.
all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. At this time, we'll open the floor for public comment. Please be sure to state your name and address, and please remember our 2-minute time limit. At this time, we will close the floor for public comment, and move on to the discussion of downtown with our DDA Director, Nate Mack.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, council. First, I want to start off by getting myself organized a bit here. With a brief farmer's market report, actually. So we had planned to have kind of a food truck rally at the farmer's market over the weekend. We had 6 food trucks in place. However, we had 2 cancel a couple of days before the market. So we ended up with 4, which is kind of what we had throughout the season, but we were trying to get more food trucks there, but they just had something where they thought they would make more money, so they went elsewhere. Continuing with the farmer's market discussion, we are beginning to move a little bit further along in the process for the winter farmer's market with the VFW. We've had additional conversations with them about hosting it there, and we just need to get approval from the DDA board after the board meeting this week, hopefully to say, yeah, we want to do that, and we'll proceed with that. About 2 weeks ago, the DDA director for Wixom reached out to me to see if I wanted to set up a meeting for us to collaborate on some events that we have between the 2 communities. The reason that she reached out to me was basically copying what Lake Orion and Oxford have done. They have a trolley that goes back and forth between the 2 communities, and they host events together and cart people back and forth, and their downtown businesses have reported an increase in sales when the trolley is running. So she thought, why not reach out to South Lyon? And I thought it was a good idea. So we had a preliminary meeting. We just kind of discussed our event schedules, how we could coordinate to have those work together and try and see if we can work something out. So look for further updates on that. 135 East Lake Street, which is the RCA building. They had their elevator inspection with the state of Michigan last week. They passed that inspection. They have their final building inspection that's taking place tomorrow. So depending on the results of that, they should be able to get their CFO relatively soon. Once that happens, then they'll turn over the keys to the restaurateur. He'll get the restaurant up and running and going, and hopefully they'll be open within, hopefully by the end of the year, if everything goes well. I've also been working with multiple individuals that are interested in opening restaurants in and outside of downtown. So things are going well there. They're still doing their due diligence, and I'm still trying to assist them in the process, but as we move along there, hopefully I'll have some additional news to report back as well. Also this week, the DDA board is meeting. As I mentioned, we'll be talking about the Winter Farmers Market. We are not going to be doing the mission statement for the Economic Vitality Committee because we didn't come up with one during the meeting. We went over data provided by the county instead. So yeah, with that, be open for any questions if anybody has any.
Councilor Kivel, go ahead.
The relationship with Wixom, is that trying to have the same type of event in each of our communities simultaneously, and you're going to trade people from one city to the other?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay,
Yeah, so it would be something similar where people could go back and forth, have some sort of transportation. We could say, you know, if you're coming from Wixom to our event or coming from South Lyon to Wixom, you know, show whatever, you'll get a discount on a purchase or something like that, just to try and help drive additional traffic to both downtowns.
okay. And secondly, have you heard anything about the theater?
So I have not heard anything about the theater, not recently. The last time I spoke with them, they said they were interested in either leasing the space out as a theater or selling it to somebody who wants to run as a theater. We have had discussions in the Economic Vitality Committee about, you know, really reaching out to them and trying to assist them with whatever it is they need help with. I haven't had much luck in getting a hold of them, so.
Now, is it still the lady from Borgman lady is in charge, or is it still with Niels?
It's still with Niels.
It
as far
is?
as I know, yep.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you.
Yep.
Well, I sure wish something would happen there.
Councilor Kennedy, go ahead.
Nate, is there any update on the electric vehicle charging stations in the Wells Street parking lot?
Yes, so I am having a meeting with DTE tomorrow to go over that, and hopefully hammer out some final details, and we can get it done before the end of the year.
Super, thanks.
Anyone else got anything for Nate tonight? All right, thanks for the update, Nate.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the fire chief report with Chief Thorrington.
Good evening, Council, Mr. Mayor. We are currently at 7,841 incidents for the year. It's gradually increasing every year. I think I sent you a graph last week, a week before, showing the increase in calls in the last, since 2013 is where our software goes back to. Our ladder truck is in the final stages of the build. It's in Nebraska. On October 25th, we're going out there to do the final inspection, look for any flaws, and then they'll fix them on the spot. And then it takes a month or so to get the shelves installed and the lights and the radios and all that. So it's coming close. Now that our COVID restrictions are mostly lifted for the area, we're looking at doing and hosting open houses again beginning in the spring of next year. We looked at doing it this fall, but it's just too big of an event we want to do it right. So we're going to put a little investigation into it and do a new one starting in the spring. We recently had a firefighter separate for personal reasons, mostly due to other obligations at his work. And then on the same note, we just hired a new hire, Nelson Schillick. He just moved to the area. He's got his own business, and it'll take probably a year and a half to 2 years to get him fully up to par as far as basic EMT and firefighter 1 and 2. So, but it is good to find people. It's really hard right now. It's becoming harder and harder to find. So, we recently promoted Brad Monahan from fire inspector to fire marshal. And then lastly, our station floors are in progress. I don't know if you've driven by, but it's a dusty mess right now. They just finished where the fire chief's car and the ambulance sits. It looks really nice. They're now moving over to the fire truck side, and it's a constant grinding noise throughout the day, so it's very peaceful. But it does look really nice when it's done, and they're doing a nice job. So, that's all I have.
Awesome. Councilor Dill, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wondered, with the increase in calls, is it mostly here in South Lyon, or are they more, do you think that it's higher, the assists that we do?
By far, the majority are here.
They are? Okay. Thank you.
Good question. Councilor Kivel?
When you bring the rig back, are you sending like 2 guys to drive it back, or?
They'll bring it back for us.
Pardon me?
They'll drive it back to, I believe, Charlotte for us. And then
Oh,
put the
okay.
lights and stuff on there. Then we'll go back up to Charlotte and drive it back here. So,
Okay. I like the idea of somebody else being responsible
Yeah, right.
in case if something goes south, you know,
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
good.
Plus, it gives them a few miles to figure out any kind of bugs, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because I was down here thinking like, does Chief Thornton get to roll that thing? Road trip to Nebraska?
Long drive, though, very far.
Yeah, I'll say.
So, no, that's great. Does anyone else have anything for Chief tonight? All right, great update. Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the police chief report with Chief Sovic.
Mr. Mayor, evening council. I just want to say, Nate, you're doing a great job. I'm working with you, so keep it up. One of our officers, Timothy Rapp, he completed the Chicago Marathon yesterday for the second year in a row. So congratulations to him. I know a lot of training went into it, so if you're thinking about running from him, maybe he'll eventually catch you. It might not be right off the bat, but he'll get to you. Just going to give you an update on the shooting incident that we had in the mobile home community back in July. We have recently received the results back from the crime lab as far as the ballistics go. We got the felony warrants on 2 individuals. One of the individuals who we believe is the shooter is actually in custody. Sergeant Cedarlin and Detective Barber, our evidence techs, did an outstanding job putting the case together and presenting to the Oakland County Sheriff's Department, the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office. So I just want to recognize them for a great job. And he's an OCJ awaiting trial. Also, from time to time, we get letters from people in our community, people that appreciate the services and the jobs that we do, and I just want to read one of them to you tonight. You see this just the other day. We came to South Lyon 27 years ago to discover a wonderful community and serve an amazing congregation as co-pastors. Later, we retired to live on Wellington. On September 16th, just after midnight, my wife of 56 years passed away. As I am writing thank you notes to family and friends, I realized I never thanked the officers who first woke up my son to come to the house and later to confirm her death. It was the most difficult time, but the care and compassion of the 2 officers helped us through the 2 hours. South Lyon has grown in ways we could not have imagined 27 years ago, but we still have those in public service who make it a community to be proud of. I just want to recognize Officer Chapsky and Officer Schneeman. This might seem like they go above and beyond, but this is what I've come to expect from our officers over the last 3.5 years of being here. So this is just normal behavior for our guys, and so this is going to continue long after I'm gone. So that's all I have for you this evening.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Does anyone else have anything for Chief tonight? Thanks, Chief. All right, at this time, we're going to welcome our friends from Plant Moran for the 2021-2022 Audit Report.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So we appreciate you having us here tonight to discuss the results of the financial statement audit for the year ended June 30, 2022. My name is Tim St. Andrew, partner on the engagement, and with me tonight is Spencer Tawa and Philip Meninio. And before we get into our audit deliverables, I would like to first take the opportunity to thank Paul and Patricia for all of their hard work throughout the whole process. We started the audit actually back in May with some interim procedures, and then the planning throughout June, and the actual field work starts in mid-August. And I mean, to put it bluntly, your team was ready to go, so it was really great. Everything was in great shape. Everybody was helpful throughout the whole process, so we really do appreciate it. Makes the process a lot easier. So our plan is to cover the contents of the presentation, and that does include an executive summary, some financial graphs, and then the required communications that we have to have with you, City Council. Certainly as we work through the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to stop us along the way. We'd be happy to address them. Okay, so we'll start with the executive summary here. And on pages 1 through 3 of the financial statements, that's what we call our auditor's report. And really that's our deliverable to you on these financial statements. You will see on the top of page 1 that we did issue an unmodified opinion, and that's the highest level of assurance that we can provide. That means that the financial statements, the numbers, and the disclosures are materially accurate, and the users of these financial statements can rely on them. The city did implement a GASB statement number 87 this year related to leases. And again, special thanks to Patricia for really gathering the information on the city's leases, As we went through that information and we analyzed it under GASB 87, we came to really two conclusions. One, the leases that the city does have are either not subject or not scoped into 87, or they were small enough that the city didn't have to record them within your financial statements. The general fund balance did increase this year by $1.9 million, so from $5.3 million last year to $7.2 million this year. Of the $7.2 million of fund balance, $5.4 million of that is unassigned. And I'm going to jump ahead a few bullet points here, but did want to explain the big jump in fund balance is really mainly due to one thing, and that's the new debt issued for the ladder truck. So the city issued the $1.25 million of debt this year. Normally, when you issue debt for a capital item, you'd have the expenditure, you'd have that capital item offsetting the issuance of debt. As you just heard a few minutes ago, that truck wasn't yet available at the end of the year. So in 2022, the city recorded the debt, the issuance of debt, so that does show up as proceeds, which increases the fund balance. What you'll see in 2023 when the truck is received, you'll see that expenditure. So you'll see the offset or the decline in fund balance next year. So it's a little bit of a timing difference. The city does continue to invest in its infrastructure, spending $3 million this year. And as you can see, it was mainly related to the water treatment plant, DPW complex improvements, and certain fire equipment. The capital project funds did end the year with $2.75 million in fund balance for spending on future capital items. There was a total debt paydown this year of $1.1 million, and as I mentioned, there was the new debt of $1.25 million for the ladder truck. The water and sewer fund did have an operating loss this year of $957,000. That is net of depreciation, which is a non-cash item. And then lastly, as you're all well aware, the new road millage was recently approved. That millage won't be levied until fiscal year 2024. And so that millage is not reflected anywhere within these financial statements. So with that, I will turn it over to Phil to go through our financial graphs.
The first graph we'd like to start with is just looking at the general fund revenue, and you can see that it went up to about $7.8 million this year from $7.4, and that was mainly due to property taxes increased just from increases in taxable values, as well as there was more state shared revenue this year than in prior years. And then there was a little bit more in building permits, which is why the fines and fees would have increased. This next slide here shows just all the money collected by the city this year. So of the $17.8 million collected, 37% of that represents millages levied by the city. The rest is levied by like the county or other governments and that are collected by the city and then dispersed to them. So only 37% was levied by went to the city. The other 63% was collected by the city and then dispersed to the proper taxing authorities. The next slide shows the general fund expenditures. And it went from about $6.6 million last year to $7.1 million this year. The main increase is due to public safety costs. As Tim mentioned, the purchase of some of that fire equipment helped raise that cost, as well as with general government. With the building permits going up, there's also that safe built percentage, so that went up with that increase in the permits. The next slide shows the unassigned fund balance compared to your annual expenditures. So it's about $5.4 million in unassigned fund balance. And so this shows about 76% of your annual expenditures would be covered by your unassigned fund balance, which we would consider to be a healthy fund balance for the general fund. And then this graph shows the other governmental funds fund balance. So you have your major and local roads, which has almost fully restricted fund balance as due to the revenue source. The Act 51 money can only be spent on the roads. And then you have small portions for non-spendable. That would just be anything that's already been prepaid. Your cemetery and perpetual care is fully restricted as well. And then the capital projects, as Tim mentioned, of $2.75 million, that is committed for future capital projects. So that balance is there, it's committed. The next slide shows the water and sewer fund, and what we're looking at here is the operating revenue plus any property taxes, kind of comparing that to the operating expenses, and we're backing out depreciation as it is a non-cash item, but then we're adding any capital improvements and debt service payments. So as you can see, the expenses are higher just from those additional, the water treatment plant project that was going through. There's a lot more expenses there, and so that was higher than the operating revenue and the property taxes this year. The next slide shows the unfunded liability for your pension and Opeb. So the pension balance here is shown as of 12/31/21. That's MERS year end. And it's the percentage that you see here is what you would see in the financial statements under the GASB standards. It might be a little bit different than what is in the funding valuations you would see. But the pension is currently 73% funded. And this, only, as I mentioned, this goes up to 12/31, so it doesn't include any of the market activity from 1/1 through 6/30/2022. And so this went, the liability decreased about 300,000. The next is the Opeb, and that's at 30% funded, and that stayed relatively the same with just a $33,000 increase in the liability for the year. And then this final table we have shows the debt service requirements for the city, and the new debt on here, you can see the ladder truck as the street sweeper, which would have been your other governmental debt, got paid off during the year. And we just also want to point out that this doesn't include anything for the upcoming road improvement bond issuance yet, as it hasn't been issued. But this is just with the ladder truck and your other water and sewer debt. So now we'll pass it over to Spencer to talk about those charges of governance costs.
All right, good evening. This is the first year that I've did not have to cover the financial graphs, which is kind of nice for me. I have the easy part today. But what I'm going to cover on the graphs is the end of audit letter. It's the letter dated September 13th, and it's addressed to the mayor and members of this council. This is a follow-up to our pre-audit letter that we sent back in maybe August or so. And this is a follow-up to that of, all right, we finished our audit, what are the results of our audit? Now, before I get into it, I do want to make a point about one thing. There were a couple new auditing standards this year that went into effect. One of them that you would notice that had a change was on the opinion letter that Tim had mentioned that we issued an unmodified opinion on. All that changed within that is where the opinion goes and some of the structure, and then also some of our responsibilities was expanded. But other than that, no other significant changes to the city. Now, as it relates to the end of audit letter, during our audit, if anything comes to our attention based on our procedures that we identify as what we call a significant deficiency in the city's internal control, we are required to present that or report that to this council. So we're happy to report that there were no significant deficiencies identified during the course of our audit. The auditing standards do require communication to this council on a few items, which I've listed a couple of them here. One thing is any new accounting standards, and as Tim mentioned, GASB 87 for leases was implemented during this current year, which really did not have much of an impact for the city. No transactions entered, which there's lack of authoritative guidance. No significant transactions recognized in a different period. And then also, we're required to present any significant estimates in your financial statements to the council. And there's three kind of big assumptions or estimates in your financial statements. And one relates to the unbilled water and sewer receivables. This just is a timing difference of when you bill the water and sewer versus when it was consumed through June 30th. So there's some assumptions that go into that, really mostly based off of prior year's billings. And then actuarial assumptions for pension and Opeb. This is a significant assumption. They're trying to project out a liability over 30, 40, 50 years using a discount rate, mortality assumptions, retirement rates. So these are significant estimates in your financial statements. Lastly, we're also required to communicate any difficulties or disagreement with management. We're happy to report there were no such items. It's always a good thing. A couple other things we have as recommendations. The first three: customer deposit payable, investment returns, equipment and interfund charges. Not going to go into too much detail. These are recurring items that we know the city is well aware of. We've talked to Paul and Patricia about it. Federal grants, I want to spend a minute on that. So the city did receive about $1.2 million in ARPA funding. That money has been received by the city. The city has not recognized that in revenue yet, just given some of the accounting guidance on when to recognize revenue. Essentially, when you plan to use it or when you do use it, that is when you could recognize it as revenue. So right now it's a deferred revenue. But usually with getting a significant amount of grant money, over $750,000, you're subject to what we call a single audit, where we come in and we do an audit on your federal grant awards. With the ARPA money, they recognize that a lot of communities who really never had a single audit would be subject to one after getting ARPA money. And so they came out with something that we could perform an examination on the money instead of a full single audit. This would be beneficial for the city, as it'll save money and time for going through a single audit. It's an option for the city and something that we could discuss with Patricia and Paul and have going forward once it's decided on how to use the funds. Other than that, there's other information that we include in our end of audit letter for your reading, and those are on pages 4 to 6 on the end of audit letter. So with that, I will open it up to any questions you guys may have.
Councilmember Kurtzwell, go ahead.
Thank you for, as always, a great presentation. I always enjoy Plant Moran. I look forward to this meeting.
Thank you.
I did have a couple of questions, and I want to go to the graph regarding water and sewer fund. And I'm a little curious about what is going on with respect to that operating loss. The trend, when you look at the graph, it looks like there was an operating loss slight in 2020. It was larger in 2021, and then it dropped a little bit in 2022.
Yep.
I'm not saying that that is enough for a trend, but I'm sort of looking at it saying, okay, is this an issue I should be concerned about? Is this an issue that requires accounting type managerial intervention where we need to get in and really find out what's going on? Or is this something that works its way out? I'm just looking for a discussion.
Yep. So this graph, and I could put this back up. So really what this is trying to get into is more so what's your cash flow in the water and sewer fund, right? So what are your operating revenues plus your property taxes that's coming in? And then what's your operating expenses, including capital improvements, debt service, all of that that's outgoing. And so, in 18, 19, and 20, there wasn't much capital improvements going on as much as 21 and 22. With the water treatment plant, as Phil said, that had a significant impact on those operating expenses or cash outflows going out the door. As far as, looking at your fund balance, you never want to see, obviously, operating expenses do that. But I think, this is not unusual, given that there were needed capital improvements that needed to be done in the water and sewer plant. So in 18, 19, you were kind of building up that capital, the fund balance in water and sewer, and now you're using it. So as I always tell every community when looking at trends, it's always important to see, all right, well, as of our year end, 6/30/2022, how much fund balance do we have at the end of the year, and what's our projection for the next 5 years for capital improvements that might come around, and seeing is our fund balance enough to cover that, and if not, that's why you have a water and sewer rate study to see, do we need to increase water and sewer rates to compensate for the increase in our capital improvements, which I believe the city had done a year or two, I believe, the water and sewer rate study.
We may have to revisit those discussions at some point. I am a little concerned because the range of the expenditures is increasing. I mean, it seems to be fairly significant. So I'm a little bit curious as to going in and dealing with it. I'm not gonna panic or anything, but I think if we take an academic approach to analyzing it and maybe get this under control a little bit, where the difference between the revenue and the expenditures are more in line with 2020, I could understand it. But I think a jump like 2021 and then, another big jump in 2022, when we know expenditures are going to be there for the next couple of years, that revenue is going to be a little bit important to take a look at. Yeah.
Good evening. So to speak to that, the water and sewer rate study that was approved 2 years ago was essentially a 10-year plan. And built into that was our capital improvement plan for the water treatment plant and some of the other things that we're doing. And so where we're at right now is almost the peak of the expenses. We have another year or two where we're going to see this trend go up even harder and further, unfortunately. But if we, following that water and sewer rate study, we continue to raise the rates as we have planned to and follow through, we're going to go back and start trending the other way at the end of the 10 years. We'll have all of those projects completed. The revenues are continuing to rise to meet the demands, and we're going to be building back up that fund balance. So right now, the graph speaks for itself. It does look a little striking. It's the next year and the year after that might look worse. But then we're going to start heading back in the direction that you want to see. But of course, at any time, we could always revisit the water and sewer rate study and make sure that we are still on track for that 10-year plan.
Well, the thing of it is that you don't want to get this out of control. So I think now is probably a good time to have this discussion so that we can stay on top of it and realize in the budget season that, like you said, we may have another year or maybe 2 more years. I think we really need to pay very careful attention to make sure that this does not get out of control, the expenditure side with respect to revenue. Like I said, I don't mind a little bit of a discrepancy like in 2020, but I think when you see these large gaps like this, it does put some financial strain on the system a little bit. So if we can plan ahead and be smart about it, I think that's just my 2 cents. So on that, thank you. I had more, Mr. Mayor.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I had a couple of issues I wanted to discuss. I'm on page 20 of the report. It's on note 1. Could you explain the difference between, not the difference, I had a question. You say grants and similar items are recognized as revenue as soon as all eligibility requirements imposed by the provider have been met. And I'm saying to myself, how can you report that as revenue if all I've done is meet the eligibility? It doesn't say that the grant was granted, it doesn't say that I received it, it just says you're eligible. You kind of met all the criteria, but we haven't taken that final step and given you authority or approval or sent you the check. Or maybe is this a term of art that I don't, need to be clarified?
Yeah, the eligibility would say once it was approved and you received it, or you have reimbursed, let's say it's a reimbursement-based grant agreement, where you have those expenses already incurred, you have a grant agreement in place, those are the eligibility requirements that have been met. So that would be what the eligibility requirements are.
Okay. And then on page 24, if you could just clarify for me the distinction in between a committed fund balance and an assigned fund balance. Because our general fund is uncommitted or unassigned, correct?
Yep.
Okay, so what's the difference between committing the fund and assigning the fund?
Yeah, so an assignment is, a committed balance is something that you could do internally here with the city council of, hey, we're gonna assign this money to be used for capital projects, and in your financial statement, it'll move from unassigned to assigned, because it'll say assigned for capital projects, right? So our intent is to use this money for a future capital project. Now, at any point in time, if the city council decides, hey, we wanna take this $1 million, I'm just making up numbers here, and move it to unassigned or some other, we want to use it for something else than capital projects, there'll need to be a resolution from city council to do so. And then, excuse me, that's from the committed balance. And then the assigned balance is what you've given city manager authorization to commit. So if Paul decides to commit a certain balance for some, for capital projects, he has the authority to do that as well, of moving money from an unassigned to a committed balance, and he could remove it as well at any point in time. And then everything else is what we call unassigned, and unassigned essentially means there's no restriction to that money. It's not in a non-spendable form. It's not committed by the city council. It's not assigned by the city manager. It is free to be used as far as any, general fund or governmental fund requirements to use that money for.
So you said that our general fund is what % of unassigned?
Of unassigned, 73% or something like that.
73% of the general fund is unassigned, so roughly, 28% or whatever is committed to what?
We have some restrictions, so I'll go to that. It's the fire truck that's mostly it. So if you go to page.
Okay, so you restrict the fund with respect to maybe debt, are you saying debt obligations restricted?
Yeah, so restriction is an outside restriction or legal authority to restrict the money. So the money for the 1.2 million for the fire truck, with that, again, the accounting's pretty odd or weird this year because of how you didn't receive it. Essentially, we had to restrict on your financial statements, there's a restricted assets of $1.25 million. That's essentially held in escrow at the lender. Once you get the vehicle, that lender will pay the ladder truck company, right? So right now that money is restricted, and so it's not part of your unassigned balance. Like that money is set aside, it's legally restricted, and so a restriction is legally imposed from an outside party, not city council, not city manager. It's from either a government agent, a granting agent, maybe for debt service, right? We have a restriction in the water and sewer for future debt service. That's what the restriction is. So in the general fund, I'm trying to go to the page, anything that's not unassigned, majority of it is the restriction amount.
So basically, you're restricting debt obligations.
Essentially, yes.
Why else would you restrict?
There is some restrictions with, let's say in the major and local road fund, you get Act 51 money from the state. That money is restricted per state, because hey, we're giving you money for road improvements. That money is restricted on your fund balance for road improvements only.
Okay. On page 25. Again, I'm still on note 1. And it's the first paragraph, the last sentence, where you say taxes are considered delinquent on March 1st, at which time penalties and interest are assessed. But interest and penalties are also assessed on October 1st if they're not paid on September 30th. So if I come in and pay my taxes on November 1st, there's going to be interest and penalties for the month of October.
Yeah. We could add that we could further expand upon this. I mean, for the most part, what we're trying to say here is they're considered delinquent March 1st. They go up to the county. That's when penalties and interest are assessed. But we can go through the whole motion of also being delinquent, the July 1st being delinquent on October 1st.
I think that's a little bit more accurate in terms of the delinquency occurs when the default occurs, which is when they're not paid, and then you have your taxes and penalties. So what happens on March 1st is that the county now has enforcement ability to go and collect the taxes. That's what happens on March 1st.
Right.
That's the trigger right there.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to get at here is going through that. But there's that part about taxes are due September 30th. We could talk
Yeah.
about penalties and interest then.
And then down on compensation of absences, it says, it is the city's policy to permit employees to accumulate earned but unused sick and vacation pay benefits. Yes and no. We do permit some accumulation of benefits, but not completely. There's a cap, I believe.
Yeah.
So,
There is, yep.
yeah, so I don't know if that is completely accurate, because it seems to imply that all sick pay, all unused vacation and benefits accumulate, and that's not true. There's a cap on what can be, we have a modified version of the accumulation policy.
Yep.
So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. The, next is, I was looking at, page 41. 41, in conjunction with your statement on page 4. Page 4, and I just need an explanation, that's all.
Yep.
On page 4, you say in the financial highlights, revenue and other financing sources, revenue, you say revenue, and financing sources exceeded expenditures in the general fund, thus increasing the fund balance by approximately $1.9 million. So it looked like we had a great year in terms of generating revenue.
Right.
But when I look back at 41 and looked at the actual tables, it looks like the variance from the budget was, in property taxes, was 401. So you had a decline in revenue there. You had a decline in investment income to a total decline in revenue of 96. It appears, when I looked at this, that what was happening was that it was on the, actually on the expenditure side that the fund balance gained. Because when you look at the expenditures that were made, they did not use their total amounts of money. So the expenditure side did not use what was budgeted.
Yep.
So is the statement really not so much that the fund balance increased because of an increase in revenue, but that the fund balance increased because there were slightly lower expenditures than expected? That's where the fund balance seems to have made the gains.
Yeah, so what that statement is saying is essentially what is your net change in fund balance? So if you look at that page 41, right, if you look at the actual column, you could see that the net change in fund balance was 1.9 million, right, of an increase. So all that statement is saying is that your revenue, which you can see the total revenue was 7.7 million, plus your other financing sources, which was the 1.2 million, which was the debt that we talked about, that the debt issued wasn't a cash transaction, but for accounting purposes, we have to add that in. So that 1.2 plus the 7.7 million, that is additions to fund balance to the city, less the total expenditures of the 7 million, that's what adds to 1.9. That's all that statement is saying.
Okay, well, that clarifies it. That clarifies it a lot.
Yep.
Thank you very much, great job.
Thank you.
Councilmember Kivel, go ahead.
The first discussion that was brought up about this whole thing, I mean, it seems kind of, it's innate to what was going on, that the capital improvements that were taking place in water, we knew that was going to end up taking a great deal of our funds. It shouldn't, nobody should be surprised that now we're seeing that our funds have been pulled down because of the cost of doing those things. I'm not opposed to the idea of trying to make sure that the rates are commensurate with what our expectations are, but at the same time, these are hard assets that are going to be in service for a long time without having to have much of any money thrown at them except for what the water is going in and the water that's coming out. So I mean, I don't think that there's anything for us to end up having a concern at all about the way the graph was showing the rising cost at the time, because it'll be made up or actually in just moments after we get past the last bill, because everything will end up being static at that point. So.
Yeah, as long as, you know, as Patricia mentioned, there's a plan for all of this, and as long as that you're still within plan and projections are showing that you're within plan, and there is a, you know, hey, we're gonna be fine at the end, like we're gonna have enough for, you know, to spend on these capital improvements that are needed, then it's fine as long as everyone's on board with, you know, the plan and knowing that, hey, we're keeping up to date on it and making sure that, forecasts are still showing that, we're still gonna be solvent with these needed improvements.
Councilor Kennedy, go ahead.
This is for Patricia. Do you know what the target year is where we start reversing that trend? You said a couple of years.
It is a couple of years, I believe it's 2026.
Yeah, I mean, there's still expenditures that are taking place, but they're just not as high. That's not the 1 million, 2 million, 3 million sort of thing. It's more like, 350,000 or 450,000, but there is that drawdown still of some money in the fund balance. But at the end of the 10 years, we recoup and we basically get to the same point we were when we actually started this whole capital improvement plan as it relates to the total fund balance. So it'll go down in 2026 and 27, and it's not as much, and then it starts to creep back up again, so we're at the same
But
place it
it's
was 10
incremental
years
change,
ago.
not a step change like that. I mean, significant change.
Right,
And that was what, about 2026?
Yes.
right.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Kurtzwell, go ahead.
Nobody else?
Nope.
I had one more question to ask you.
Yep.
There was a discussion, I don't know, two meetings ago, regarding, and I believe Councilmember Lori Mosher brought it up. I thought it was a really, really good point about increasing the limit of approval for certain expenditures.
Yep.
What is your experience with other cities in terms of, ours is 5,000.
Yeah.
What's your experience
Yeah,
with what other cities?
It's all over the board, what we see. I would say yours tends to be a little, probably on the lower end than what I've seen. Maybe Tim could speak on it. So yours is on a little, on the lower end. As long as, there's still other processes in place, right, to see what has been paid. You're looking at budget to actual. There's other compensating items that could happen with keeping, if you do raise that threshold of those purchases. One thing, and we have this in our end of audit letter too, when we talked about the federal threshold, they even increased theirs to, I think, 10,000 for micro purchases. So that should give you an indication that generally places are increasing their thresholds.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, does anyone else have anything for our friends from Plant Moran tonight? Thank you, Spencer. Thanks, team.
Thank you.
I am just gonna take a moment really quick and tidy that up for a second and plug that back in so that'll work. And then we'll move on. Okay, thank you for that, everyone. No unfinished business this evening. We'll move on to new business number 1, City Council Rules of Procedure. City Manager Zelding, go ahead.
At a city council meeting in April 2020, city council adopted the rules of procedures. I've attached those for you. The rules are to contribute to efficient operation of our city council, our city, and all of our meetings. I've asked council to review those particular items, specifically on page 12 in relationship with the public as well as staff and consultants. The main discussion on this has to do with members of council should refrain from argument with a member of the public or staff at council meetings since the arguments seldom resolve concerns and many times inflame feelings at a public meeting. Any concerns by a member of council over behavior of work or city employee during a council meeting should be directed to the city manager to ensure the concern is addressed. As it relates to the relationship with staff and consultants, It said there should be a mutual respect from both staff and council members of their respective roles and responsibilities when, if expressing criticism in public session. Requests for information or questions by city council shall be directed to the city manager. All non-routine requests should be submitted to the city manager's office, and all complaints should be submitted to the city manager. A council member shall not direct staff or consultant to initiate any action or prepare a report in significant nature or initiate project or study without approval of the majority of council. All such requests should go through the city manager. At some prior meetings, we've had council members, unfortunately, intimidate staff members and consultants, and I don't want something like this to happen again. We've had conversations about this before, 6 months ago and a year and a half ago, and unfortunately, it has still continued. Council should also not be telling staff or directing them what consultants to do regarding any particular actions. City council only has to hire, compensate, and evaluate and motivate one employee, and that's me. It's my job to do that for the 70-plus full and part-time employees here at the city. With what happened at a prior meeting makes that job that much more difficult. Staff members are worried, and they've confided in me that they're going to be the next person that's going to get talked to that way at a city council meeting. I care about the city and the employees who work for it, and as their manager, I don't want staff to be treated this way again. We have to constantly work to retain and attract good people. Unfortunately, acting that particular way at a council meeting won't allow us to do that. Our rules are very specific regarding relations with the public and staff and consultants, and as I mentioned about reviewing that on page 12 in relationship to the public and the staff and consultants. And I wanted to have discussion on this and bring this up tonight because like I said, I don't want something like this to occur again at a city council meeting.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Dill.
Thanks. I have a couple questions, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
And then if I could hold the floor, I just have a
Yep,
statement after
certainly.
that. I think maybe this will go to Lisa, but I'm not sure. What page am I on? Page 4, B, number 6. It says council members are not to speak directly to each other or to a staff member. I was just wondering, when we do reports with staff members, what suspends that? Like, why are we able to ask questions during that time and not other times? I don't know who that, go ahead.
So these are rules of procedure, and the purpose of the rules of procedure are for effective and efficient governance. The mayor has the discretion to allow things to, he doesn't have to be strict interpreter or enforcer of the rules as long as we're continuing with the purpose of the rules and it's efficient and effective governance. Couple that with, remember, these rules are based primarily on the charter, the ethics ordinance, and state law, as well as really to be efficient and effective. If there are other issues, ethic violations, state law violations, charter violations, there may be other mechanisms or things you should or shouldn't do. There may be penalties associated with them. But generally speaking, the purpose of these rules, if it doesn't violate a charter, ordinance, or state law, is for proper administration.
Okay. That actually answered 2 of my other questions, so that was helpful. Thank you. I just wanted to make a quick statement on this situation. I just want to say that one of the reasons I ran for city council originally was because I had seen some previous council meetings, and I was a little shocked by some of the conduct. And I really felt like I could be an even-keeled, calm person who listened to other people, and I was really hoping that that's what we could do. And one of the things I've been most pleased with since joining is I feel like that we have done that. Despite being very different people with very different views, I think for the most part we've conducted ourselves in a respectful manner, listening to each other. We make decisions based on what we think is best for the city, not on ourselves personally, avoiding attacks and giving support to the city. But I'm glad this was brought up because I feel like this has been slipping a little lately, and I have been a little concerned. I don't want to dance around the issue. A couple meetings, the reason this is brought up is because a couple meetings where Councilmember Kennedy was what I considered unnecessarily directive or disrespectful to city staff and consultants. I did speak to him about the situation. I let my feelings be known to the city manager and the mayor. But I just wanted to also say that it's not just his issue. It really is on all of us. Because when these things occur, one of us should have stepped in and stopped it. And, you know, when you're in a conversation or you're in a situation where something's happening that you don't agree with and you do nothing, you're complicit. So I just want to personally apologize to the city manager, the city staff, residents and consultants for, at least on my part, for not speaking up when I should have. And I think if we don't step in, I'm going to ask the mayor to hold us to higher standards, and I have, to step in and protect the integrity of our meetings and our staff. And that goes for the same for public comment. I don't want to discourage any residents who want to speak up. I'd never infringe on their First Amendment rights, but I also think I want to apologize for not speaking up when our employees were disrespected last meeting, also on public comment. I'd again, I feel like I should have stepped in and asked the mayor to remind speakers to address us and not other staff members who might be in the audience or other people who are in the audience. I do feel really good about our board. I think we're doing really good work in our city, and I hope we can use this issue as a reminder and kind of a reset and not carry this on past this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Dill. I appreciate all of that. Councilmember Mosier.
Yeah, I just would like to say a couple things too. I already gave my apologies to the staff and our city manager for what happened. But I just, as a former employee that worked for the city for 25 years, I don't think we all understand how intimidating it is to get up to that microphone and then to be grilled the way the last meeting went. That's why we have a city manager. And I've always said this to other people, if you have a complaint, you got a problem with an employee, you see something that's not being done, we go to the city manager and let him do his job. This is what he gets paid for, not us. We're here to make policy. It's one of the first things they tell you in elected officials training that we went to. Our job is policy making, not day-to-day operations. That's why we have a city manager. He gets paid to do that job. Let him do his job. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Mosier. You know, I will definitely shoulder some of the blame on that. You know, we, as many of the other municipalities in the state, were doing video meetings for the better part of a year and a half. And, you know, there's no excuse. We've worked far too hard to be better at this than to let it slip now. So the buck stops with me on that. That's my role up here. And I will be more aggressive to make sure that we don't slide down that slide. So, but I do appreciate everyone's feedback on the matter. And I think we are in a position where hopefully we will be able to learn from it and move forward. So, Councilmember Kennedy, if you'd like the floor, go ahead.
Yeah, I just, you know, I truly appreciate the comments that have been made and apologize that the situation occurred. I'll definitely take them to heart and modify my behavior accordingly. As a note, I did speak with Nate following that meeting and apologize for my behavior and being a little intense in the discussion, and promise not to repeat it going forward. So Nate and I came to agreement on it. We have a good relationship, and I certainly hope it will continue going forward. Oh, I have Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Councilmember Kennedy. Councilmember Kibble.
I think that it's also incumbent to understand that when we have a concern about something that's going on within the realm of the city, going to the city manager, he needs to end up actually taking the comments that we're bringing to him, and if they're actionable, he needs to actually engage in that. So this can't simply be, we're the only ones that don't have the ability to have some kind of comment where it just falls off in the vapor. So, and that's happened quite often. Think something is brought over to the city manager, and then it's just kind of danced around, and then it just disappears. So you feel as though, I mean, our role is actually to try to identify things that need to be looked into and come to some conclusion whether or not there's a better way to go, or is somebody misreading something. So I think that it's important that is the attitude that when we go to the city manager, that attitude has to be either you get you get a serious engagement about what the issue is, or the city manager makes a cogent argument to say that it's inappropriate or that can't be done or whatever. But it can't simply be we end up going, do our thing with them, and then it just evaporates. So that's very frustrating. And I think that a number of us have had some really good conversations and trying to spin some direction in a way that would be constructive, and it's simply been ignored. So I don't feel that that's necessarily the way to go either. So thank you.
Councilmember Kurtzwell, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This wasn't a single incident, the incident with the city employee. I also went in the following week or a couple days and sat and chatted with the young man. But there was also an incident with HRC. In fact, that was an extremely difficult meeting that night. I remember going up to the HRC individuals and apologizing for how they were treated at that meeting, and that was in July, so that was fairly recent. That was a rough night too. I was shocked to hear that Mr. Kennedy was calling a city employee during a public emergency. I found that absolutely outrageous, that any council member would contact a city employee during any emergency. We hire professionals, they know how to do their job. And how many times have I sat here at this microphone and said, we do not micromanage employees? Now, the city attorney could opine on whether or not a city council member has employment liability for how they conduct themselves with the employees. The city attorney can opine as to whether or not a union employee can file a grievance against a city council member that is interfering with their job. So let's talk about that a little bit. These employees come to work every day to do a job that has a job description, and they report to a manager who evaluates them, provides them feedback, assists them on performing their job. If me as council or any other council member interferes with that process, that is, to me, a serious problem. That is a very serious problem. It is not our job to interfere with how they are doing their job. I think some people on this council think they know it all. They have all the answers. They're smart people. Well, guess what? Some of you smart people have been on this council for a long time, and we're still mopping up your messes. So don't sit here and opine to me that you think you know it all, because you don't. These employees have far more experience in what they are doing for this city, whether it's police or fire or DPW or whatever, than any one of us sitting up here, including myself. Now, what happened at that last meeting, from my point of view, I thought that Steve Kennedy created a hostile work environment for you. That was a hostile work environment. If I were you, I wouldn't have come back to work the next day. That's my honest opinion. I'm not going to sit here and lie about it. I'm going to be very honest about it. And that's the problem when city council members think they know more than the employees, because you potentially are setting up employment issues. When you go into an employee's office and you have a fight with them and you argue with them, did it ever occur to you that maybe there are employees on the other side of the wall that are hearing that? If I were an employee and I heard a city council member come into the city manager's office and rant and rave, I'd be scared to death to come to work, because I would be afraid I would be the next target. I've actually been told that the neighbor across the street heard an argument a month ago. Steve Kennedy and somebody in the parking lot. I don't know. This isn't an isolated incident. This is a problem. And saying sorry isn't solving the problem. That's what's important to understand here. There's something going on, and somewhere along the line, this train has to be stopped. And council is going to have to step in and begin taking whatever measures are needed to ensure our employees that they are not going to be intimidated, that they can come to work without being where we are, whatever. So I don't know. But it's got to stop. It really does. So I don't know if the gentleman wants to leave as premeditary. Maybe there's somebody else on the city that would make a better individual supporting the mayor. Maybe it's time. Maybe it's time. Because this can't go on. It just can't go on. And I don't know if sitting here talking about it is going to change. It's been brought up before. It's just not stopping. It's not stopping.
All right, if no one else has anything on that, Paul, did you have anything else to add?
Not at this time, Mayor, no.
Okay. All right. We'll move on to the budget this evening. I know we've had a little bit of a budget-heavy evening. Does anyone have anything on the budget? Patricia, if you have anything? Okay. All right. At this time, we'll open the floor for public comment. Please remember to state your name and address, and remember our 2-minute time limit.
Good evening. Ryan Lair, 716 Grand Court, and I'm also the ambassador of South Lyon, and I'm here tonight to support the city manager and the rest of the city council members that encountered the last previous meeting. I happened to watch the video and was appalled at the situation that took place. I'm glad that the city manager is addressing bullying. I believe that city council and South Lyon should have a zero anti-bullying policy. Our workers do a tremendous job every day. As some of you all know, I'm a DoorDasher now, and I work 7 days a week, and I'm out every day. I see more every day than most people because I'm out on the road. And I see countless employees doing a tremendous job, from watering the plants, watering the flowers, just doing amazing jobs. South Lyon Fire Department going on a run to save somebody. South Lyon Police Department going out, just saying hi to everybody, and just, if we acted like them, this wouldn't even be a problem. Why don't you model yourself after the South Lyon Police Department? That's a good role model, don't you think? You had 2 officers that stayed with the person that had to tell a loved one that their person passed away, and they stayed with them and comforted them. They didn't have to do that, but they did, because they knew it was the right thing to do. When are we going to stop the bullying and protect our employees and protect the great people that make this city work the way they do. We have hundreds of employees that do an amazing job every day, 7 days a week. We owe it to them. And that's all I'm going to say on it.
At this time, we'll close the floor for public comment, and we'll move on to the manager's report with City Manager Zelding.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The City Hall work continues. You can see outside the large cranes out there. We've had some concrete being poured within the last few days. We try to keep the city building open as much as we possibly can based upon all the work that's being done. This Thursday, though, our offices will be closed because they're going to be bringing in all the HVAC units, and based upon lifting those multi-ton units throughout the day within the parking lot and bringing them up on the building, and for the safety and rules and regulations, we're not going to be able to have City Hall open that day. People will still be able to use the drop box. Certain staff members will be working off-site to still provide services. Next week, there will be, again, work on the parking lot, so that means that we'll have limited parking within our building as they start to mill and resurface, which will take several days to occur. We'll have parking that will still be allowed on the street. Employees will be parking off-site, whether it's in parks or down the street also. So I just ask that everybody make sure, ensures, or helps us keep this be a safe project. The DPW paving project is slated to begin this week. They were out there meeting with the contractors and our engineers and staff today, going over the final details of the project. I'm still meeting with our consultants on our paving projects and moving forward for next year's construction. We're also working on the cross-access agreement between the schools and the City of South Lyon, between the school building and Whipple Street parking lot. We hope to have that prepared for City Council soon. The ARPA funds, we are going to be having a meeting on that at our next City Council meeting. We'll be discussing those particular uses and some of the potential suggestions that were discussed with department heads, and then also going over some of the items that were discussed by City Council members, and then moving forward with getting approvals on some of these things and doing the research before we do actually make those, those particular expenditures within the years to come. I had a council member ask questions regarding a few items. One was 110 Detroit Street. The owners of that building have until November 25th to comply with the judge's order regarding having certain items done on that particular building. After that time, then they could potentially be held in contempt and sanctions or other items brought before them. We're still waiting and to see what kind of activity is taken place or will be taking place prior to that date. The sewer easements that we've been working on, the attorney has prepared some consent judgments for the utility companies to get this moving forward. Hopefully we'll be able to still work on that project by spring. And the water tank, they have drained, and they are going to be working on the repairs for that, and that includes injection and complete review of the liner to see where exactly where the actual leaks were occurring, and try to assess what exactly needs to be done. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that council members may have.
Councilmember Kibble, go ahead.
You spoke to 110, so have any sanctions been made?
Sanctions, no. The judge, we were in court the first week of September, and the judge gave them 1 week to be able to respond to all their questions that occurred in the court that day. And then they gave them, the court gave a direction that you have until this date to get these items completed, and that is by November. We are waiting for, the judge issued an opinion or was preparing an opinion, but they have not given out that opinion. They may wait for that November 25th date to see if they comply, to issue what some of the sanctions may be, or she may decide to issue that opinion prior to that date. But right now, that November 25th date is a date that they have to have, I believe it's the roof, the windows, and the doors completed.
Well, I mean, that'll be a nice thing to see if it does happen.
And
but
we
it's
also
just staggering that we can end up being held hostage by a dangerous building, and the courts are aware of it, and yet they won't end up pulling the trigger. I just don't get that.
And the ordinance officer went out there again to look at some of the violations, and those other violations could incur additional tickets because they were supposed to be maintaining the exterior of the building.
I was wondering also, has anybody reached out to the people that had purchased that Iron Services property?
I have not. I don't know if Nate has had any contact with them yet or not.
Yeah, I think we need to end up leaning all over them. That's a big place. I mean, there's got to be people in there that would end up having some interest in knowing what's going on here. And I think we should end up having an interest in what's going on over there. I had one more thing. No, I suppose not. All right, thank you.
Councilmember Kurtzwell, go ahead.
I was wondering, I'm not quite sure how to go about this, whether we talk about it now or put it on the agenda for the next meeting about raising this minimum level to 10,000.
We will have to make a change to the ordinance, and I can be discussing that. If you're making that request, we can review that, and I can update council at a future meeting.
Well, I mean, I know how I feel. I don't know how the rest of council feels, so maybe if.
Yeah, by putting
people-
it on the agenda and having discussion and what exactly we need to do.
Yeah, and then you'll know. Yeah, because I was glad to hear Plant Moran, they've got the experience, they have a know-how. And do we have some sort of bicentennial or something coming up next year?
The 150th?
Yeah, something like that?
Yeah, not exactly the bicentennial, but
Yeah,
yes,
but-
I'm not sure what it's called, but
but
when you use the
Are
150.
are we planning anything, or what?
We at the city have not. I have had discussions. People have come in and kind of talked about the Historical Society, and a couple other individuals had talked about, working together in the cultural arts, had mentioned something to me, and I had contact with them last week or 2 weeks ago, and they were going to be doing some additional research regarding putting something together for that as well.
Because maybe if we had something sort of in place, we could sort of budget for it, provide money to the various organizations that may be doing something, or, getting somebody, another headliner over in our McCandy Park. And that's the next question. Are you working on another headliner like we had this year with Anita Cochran? I mean, that was such a great concert. It went over so well.
Absolutely. We will continue to want to pursue that, and because we, solicited, I think it was over $2,000 or $3,000 worth of donations this year that we had sponsors for the event, which is, the first time that we had something like that. We definitely want to have a big event every year, because that, drew a crowd of, 500 plus people. It's the biggest crowd we've ever had for a concert. That we needed to kick it up a notch, and we've spent a little bit more money by being able to have those donations, and we want to have that. We want to have a signature one, and that was just the discussions we had, and I think people were all on board with it. The staff was on board, enjoyed having the camaraderie, the Kiwanis, people selling items, everything that took place. It was definitely a good thing for South Lyon this year.
Well, because if you're going to get a headliner, I would almost think that you need to have that scheduled a year ahead of time. I mean, you just can't book those guys, men and women, on 90 days' notice. I mean,
Right, and staff is reviewing, who we had this year, who we'd like to bring back, what are some other dates. And yeah, when you have the headliner, then you kind of work everything else around that particular headliner, and then put everybody else in for specific dates. Whether if you decide that you're bringing in another country group or whatever, you don't want to have 2 or 3 other country events. You want to have, some of the other events, but it is looking at doing something like that again.
Just, once again, the cost will probably increase, because I think Anita Cochran was very generous, just a wonderful performer. But I don't expect all of the performers to be that generous, so the price would definitely increase. So, okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Anyone else got anything for the city manager this evening? All right. With that, we'll move on to council comments. And how about Councilmember Dill kicks us off tonight?
All right, I think I talked enough, but I will just say congrats to Twisted Cork on their first-year anniversary. They've become a wonderful business and a tremendous community support. So just wanted to say that, and that's all I have.
All right,
Thanks.
thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Kurtzwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. think what I'm going to say is probably in line with who I am as a person. Quite disturbed that we had to have this conversation tonight. And I would not be opposed, if this continues, to remove Mr. Kennedy as mayor pro tem. At least make the motion. Whether or not their support is another story, but at some point, we have to begin putting in a system where people understand we mean business. That's it. And hopefully, welcome Mr. Kennedy and his comments, but we do need a change, a serious change. And apologies are not sufficient. Next, I would like to thank Patriot Cement for their incredible donation. I think that's absolutely fabulous, and I want to thank them for becoming a part of our city. They're a recent owner that's moved into the city, so I want to thank them. Also want to thank all the people in the city that are continuing to support the farmers market. We're having a great time down there. I didn't make it this past Saturday, but it's a great place to be, and I want people to continue to come down. I know it's October, it's a little bit chilly, but there's a honey down there that I got to try. It's called buckwheat honey. It's supposed to be very good for colds. And last, please remember the flu shot. They're saying we could have a very bad flu season. Please don't take any unnecessary risks if you don't have to. So think of your health and everybody else's. So good night, everybody.
Thank you, Councilmember Kurtzwell. Councilmember Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tonight, I want to congratulate the South Lyon High School varsity equestrian team for finishing in first place in the regionals competition last weekend. I also want to wish the team the very best as they move on to compete at the state championship that takes place this week from October 13th through the 16th at the Midland County Fairgrounds. I know that the South Lyon community is certainly hoping they'll go all the way. Next on Saturday, October 15th from 10 a.m. till 1 p.m., the Salem South Lyon District Library, in partnership with the Lyon Township Public Library, will be holding a document shredding event. This event will be held at the Lyon Township Public Library location on South Milford Road. And so now's a great opportunity to protect your personal information and destroy your confidential documents at a paper shredding event at that library. All documents will be destroyed on site. And finally, on Thursday, October 20th at 6 p.m. at the South Lyon Hotel, there will be a dinner and comedy event to benefit Active Faith, the Active Faith Food Pantry. You can contact Active Faith at 248-437-9790 for details and to purchase tickets. So make plans now to come out for a great time and a very worthwhile cause. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Kennedy. Councilmember Mosier.
I'm good tonight, thanks.
Okay. Councilmember Kibble.
Just a little recap about the car show, the last car show. I mean, that was a really nice thing to have the first responders end up receiving the $2,500 from them. I thought that was just terrific, and much in the same light, that Patriot Concrete donation, I think, is really just a real stand-up move by those people. That's very cool. That's really all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Kibble. I'll just keep it brief. I'm incredibly thankful for everyone picking me up as I was out sick. Just could not pick a worse week to decide to go ahead and get COVID for the first time. So wiped me out for homecoming in the press box, wiped me out for the whole weekend. But we had some good family time at home in the overcast weather at the house, and tried to make the best of our own Pumpkin Fest on Wellington Drive over there. So, but no, seriously, it was painful to miss out on all that, and I'm very thankful for everyone that picked up a lot of weight for me for that week, and I'm glad to be back. I don't like missing meetings. I don't like feeling like I'm missing out on what's going on and having a vibe of what's going on over here at City Hall. So I appreciate that very much, even though I was beyond sour and grumpy. So thank you. I will not be looking for a motion to adjourn tonight. I will be looking for a motion to go into closed session this evening. Councilmember Kurtzwell.
Thank you. I move to go into a closed section, Section 8A of the Open Meetings Act, MCL 15.268, at the request of the city manager to conduct performance evaluation.
I'll support.
Thank you. City Clerk Deaton, could you lead us in a roll call vote on that?
Dilg,
Yes.
Kurzweil,
Yes.
Mosier,
Yes.
Kennedy,
Yes.
DeVoe,
Yes.
Alcat.
Yes. To everyone in the crowd, the city attorney would like me to remind you, and I'm going to try and do that the best I can this evening, that if we come out of closed session and we are taking action, we will open the doors. Is that good enough? No?
You'll open the doors either way.
Okay.
They will take an action.
Okay. Thank you. I'll get it one of these days.